On today's show, we've got the Rinkside Roundup. We'll talk about Michael Hage's NCAA debut and a lot more on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hage, QMJHL and crossover scout for Elite Prospects with Sebastian High, USHL and crossover scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down the Rinkside Roundup. It's our weekly episode where we look back at the standout performers of the week in this past week. Players who either performed really well in one game or had a really good week overall, playing 2 or 3 games and excelling in terms of point totals, that kind of stuff. In the first segment, we'll focus on a couple of NCAA boys because the NCAA is back in full force. We have Michael Hage and Isaac Howard going off to a torrid start to the season. In the second segment, we'll look at a couple of OHLers. Carson Rehkopf and Jacob Battaglia have been having great seasons as well and had a great week. And then finally, we'll look at a couple of prospects from other leagues. Riley Heidt from the WHL, a Minnesota Wild prospect, returned to the Dub after doing really well at camp and basically took his team by storm, and a Carolina Hurricanes fifth rounder who scored a hat trick as the 13th forward in an SHL game. But before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. If you're watching on YouTube as usual, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you think of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rating review and make sure to make us your first of the day. So let's get started right away here with Michael Hage and Isaac Howard, who have been having fantastic season. We'll start off with Hage because it's his NCAA debut. He was playing with the Chicago Steel last season in the USHL. He's a 6-foot, 190-pound center. Drafted by the Habs, the Montreal Canadiens, the 21st overall in the 2024 NHL draft. And he had a great start with the University of Michigan Wolverines, scoring two assists in his first game, then a goal and an assist in his second game, playing really well overall. I especially liked his goal in that second game. Came in on his offside and did his trademark at this point. Cut inside the defender's triangle and shoot on the far side. If you don't know, the defender's triangle is the space between their stick and their skates. It's a little triangle between those three vectors, those 3 points. It's a spot that is really useful to exploit in transition when you're moving down the wall, right? Like, this is a move that we see NHLers perform. Talk me through the importance of that move and how Michael Hage pulls it off so effectively.
Very important, especially for dynamic rush attackers, which is exactly what Michael Hage is. It's when you're attacking with speed and you have to make the most of a little bit of space that you're given. I mean, especially at the NCAA level, defensive coverage is a lot more sound than it was at the USHL level. So it's a very big jump in competition of quality for Michael Hage here, but he's very much still using his pace, his speed to open up gaps in defensive structures and then cutting inside and attacking defenders triangles to get shots through on goal and to also access the middle of the ice a little bit more, which is awesome to see. And I mean, you did an entire video breaking down his game and also talked at length about this process. So we can link that in the cards above if for anyone who's interested in checking out a more in-depth video analysis of how Michael Hage plays. But as you mentioned, a really skilled attacking player. And I mean, goal and 4 points in 2 games is not a bad start at all. He's going to be a key offensive piece for the University of Michigan. It's also a great place for him to be developing his craft. That's a program that is just consistently churning out NHLers and also bring in a lot of skilled players and not just fostering their skilled elements, but very much teaching them the ins and outs of what you need to translate well to the pro game. And we saw that with Gavin Brindley and Frank Nazar at the tail end of last season, making that leap to the NHL and in just a couple games there, obviously, but it performed very nicely. Rutger McGroarty as well certainly took some very big steps in his time at the University of Michigan. And we're going to see Michael Hage hopefully do the same thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great program, one of the best in the NCAA overall. They churn out talent like no one else, even draft year talent. Looking back at Matty Beniers and Owen Power and those types of guys, I mean, there's a definite pipeline going on in Michigan right now, and it's a great program for him to develop the things that he needs to develop. I'd say that Hage will need a couple years in the NCAA to become as efficient as he can be. Some things he'll need to add to his game. I've talked about it in the video, which will be linked in the cards, as Sebastian mentioned, but. Overall, I mean, you're talking about a prospect who the things he really needs to improve are his decision making in transition, his defensive game a little bit, and his physical game especially. Those are things that develop usually really well in the NCAA because you're facing 22, 23, 24-year-old established defenders who can bully you physically, who can punish you along the boards. And the pace of play in the NCAA forces you to make better and better decisions as you progress. So Hage is in the best league in order to continue to improve the specific things that he needs to work on. That gives him a lot of promise in terms of developing into an NHLer. He's got skill. He's got amazing hands. He's got great crossover usage and footwork and transition speed. He's a very toolsy player. And when it comes to making decisions across the board throughout his season with the Chicago Steel and the USHL, that gradually developed more and more into something that can translate well to the NHL. So he's on a great development pathway in a great league to develop the exact things he needs to work on. Very, very promising prospect. I think there's a decent chance he ends up at the very least as a second liner for the Habs term. He's got the speed, the skill, and he's improving in ways that matter. But moving on to Isaac Howard here. Who's been really, really good to start off the year. 3 goals, 2 assists, 5 points in his first 2 games with Michigan State. He's gone back there after going a point a game in his last season and has become a very, very potent player in his third and hopefully final year in the NCAA. He was drafted in the first round, 31st overall in the 2022 NHL draft, and took some time to establish himself as a plus value offensive player. But with Isaac Howard, was very much not a doubt from day one is the skill set itself. He is Mr. Showtime. He's always been. He loves the flash and the flair and the skill. He's very dangly. He loves to shoot through opponents. He likes to change the angle on a shot to get his release up and through goaltenders and surprise them. Very, very skillful. And again, he's got that flair, that daring ability that really works in the NCAA, and hopefully he'll be able to scale up to the NHL someday. Overall, yeah, what have you thought of the progression of Isaac Howard over the past couple of years? Has his game changed at all in your opinion, or is he kind of the same player? What do you think?
He's definitely finding his niche. Like his D+1 season was really difficult for him with the University of Minnesota Duluth before he transferred over to Michigan State last season, and he definitely found a better niche there. And definitely a program that benefited him a decent amount. And I mean, he went from scoring 17 points in 35 games to 36 points in 36 games. So a really big jump there, but he's already almost halfway to matching his goal total from last season. He scored 8 goals last year and 6 goals the year before then. So we're going to be hoping to see some more goal scoring out of him because he is, as you mentioned, such a dynamic skater, a dynamic puck handler. He's constantly trying to create with his skill, but that finishing touch that we saw a bunch in his draft year season, especially internationally for Team USA, just hasn't quite been there in the NCAA just yet. And you mentioned to me yesterday as well that the second game of the season that he was playing for Michigan State was the first time in his college career that he had a 2-goal performance in a game where he scored 2 goals and an assist, and also had 8 shots on goal. So he's actually firing the puck a lot more often. He's willing to trust his shot and practice his shot. And that's something that we definitely wanted to see from him. But I mean, he's in a good development program here at Michigan State, and then he'll be off to the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I mean, whether he's playing in the AHL or with the NHL team, that's a fantastic organization to be a part of in terms of being able to add a lot of these elements to make his toolkit a bit more cohesive and function against professional competition, because the raw skill and dynamism has never been in question with Ike Howard. It's always been, can he actually do this consistently? Can he actually finish on the chances he's creating? And can he actually be a 200-foot player? And he's going to need to be to make it work in Tampa Bay. They definitely value their wingers that work hard on both sides of the puck. But I'm very curious to see how he takes a step this season, and also whether or not he returns for a 4th and final college year after this.
For sure. And just before we close things off here on this NCAA kind of segment, a quick honorable mention to Jack Devine and Zeev Buyam, who through 2 games for the University of Denver have 6 assists and 4 assists, respectively. So they've been off to a torrid start as well. Great start for those two. And Zeev Buyam, honestly, I don't know how he slipped to 12th. He should have been picked higher. For me, he was, if not the best defender, one of the best defenders in the 2024 NHL draft. But that's our first segment done. We'll get into our second segment here where we talk about a couple of OHLers who have been performing incredibly well. Carson Rehkopf and Jacob Battaglia are up in just a second, but just before, a quick word from our sponsors at Gametime. If you're looking to buy cheap tickets last minute to any event, Gametime is the best place to secure them. Gametime is safe, secure, incredibly easy to use, and they love to save you money. They've got a bunch of deals in order to help you save. They've got flash deals, zone deals, last minute deals. You can even, there's even the Gametime guarantee to make sure you get the best price. If you find a ticket on the same section and row for less than what Gametime has to offer you, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference on your tickets. And I'm obsessed with Gametime. I use it all the time. I mean, whenever I've got an afternoon free out of nowhere, which happens often, I look up Gametime, I see what kind of events are in my area, and it's not just for sports, comedy, theater, anything that requires tickets. Gametime has it for you. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, super simple. You just create an account and use a code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. So download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so let's move on to our second segment here where we look at a pair of OHLers, and we'll start off with Carson Rehkopf, the Seattle Kraken prospect. Has had a great couple of games here this week. 4 goals, 6 assists, and 10 points over the season. But over the last 2 games, 2 goals, 5 over the last 3 games rather, 2 goals, 5 assists, and 7 points over these last 3 games. And it's really about the chemistry that he's developed with Porter Martone there on their first line. Those two have been working really well together. They had a rough game against the Niagara Ice Dogs, but they still managed to get the first goal on board before Kevin He and the Niagara Ice Dogs just took over the game completely. And yeah, it's really about the chemistry that those two have developed with the Brampton Steelheads over the course of the season. He only scored a point last night as we're recording this, a primary assist on Porter Martone's goal. But the game before that, he was absolutely fantastic as well. Do you have his point totals pointed out for that specific game? Because I remember him racking up some decent points in that game.
Yeah, so he scored against London 2 goals and an assist for 3 points. And the game before that against Barrie, he also had 3 assists. So he had back-to-back 3-point nights there in the last week. Absolutely.
Just fantastic stuff from him. The goal scoring has always been the key strength with Rehkopf. He has one of the best shots outside of the NHL. It's a howitzer. It's powerful. It's accurate. He picks corners really well. He doesn't need a lot of time and space to shoot. We saw that a lot with the Kitchener Rangers last year before his move to Brampton. And overall, a fantastic shooter. But the playmaking game has improved. He's been able to use give and goes with Porter Martone, and I think developing key chemistry with a key player like him has been really good. He was playing with Luca Pinelli and Philip Meshar last year with Kitchener intermittently.
Francesco Pinelli.
Frankie Pinelli, I apologize.
Yeah.
I mix those two up a decent amount. But yeah, Frankie Pinelli and Philip Meshar were kind of the 2 key guys he was playing with, including as well Edward Challa, but Edward Challa is Edward Challa. He's got issues. But overall, Carson Rehkopf was fantastic for the Brampton Steelheads. Really key player. Important in all 3 zones, surprisingly as well. He's improved his defensive game, and yeah, there's a lot to love there. And the fact that Martone and Rehkopf basically single-handedly ragdolled the London Knights. Yes, the Oliver Bonkless and Denver Barkulus London Knights, but it's still the London Knights. They had a great show in that game, and I think those two are going to be developing chemistry throughout the year and showing how good they both play off each other. So I love this for Carson Rehkopf. And then you have Jacob Battaglia, a Calgary Flames second rounder, 62nd overall in just this past draft in 2024, who's been really good for the Kingston Frontenacs. In the last 2 games of this week that he played, 4 points, a goal and 3 assists against the North Bay Battalion in a 9-0 win. And then he scored a goal as well against the Ottawa 67s in a 5-4 overtime loss. So in total, it brings him up to 5 points in the 2 games that he played this week. And he was key as well. I mean, with Battaglia, the issue has always been the kind of lower pace, kind of lower speed game that he plays. He doesn't have the best skating, and he's not the most physically built, but the toolkit overall was fantastic. And he's a very energetic player. He'll hunt down players on the forecheck, kind of create turnovers, cycle them up. He's got a decent game on that side. But overall, it's a skill, right? Like, he's a great playmaker. He's got a great shot as well. And he's been really, really showcasing it so far in the first couple of games that he's played with the Kingston Frontenacs. He is up to 12 points in 5 games, 5 goals and 7 assists on the season. So he started off the season with 4 multi-point games and then got a goal in this past game that he played this Sunday. It's a great season from him as well. But I remember him not really being really high on either one of our boards, Jacob Battaglia. Kind of what was your read on Battaglia and your take on his game pre-draft here?
Yeah, I had some question marks around the skating specifically with Battaglia. But the flashes were really solid, especially like the second half of the season for Kingston last year. The first half wasn't the strongest, but he was really put into a bigger role during the back half of the year and was really like taking that and running. I mean, he's a physical winger, quite intelligent, good sense of timing, can slip past opponents despite not being a very good skater because he is that intelligent and he reads defense as well. Is a really good passer, good one-touch like creator, and can connect play decently well from the wing, and plays very, very physical despite just being 6 feet tall. He's over 200 pounds, really solidly built, and clearly has just gotten off to a fantastic start this season. I mean, he's towards the top end of OHL scorers. He's on par in terms of point production with Michael Misa through 5 games so far, even though Michael Misa has 10 goals and Battaglia has 5, so might want to give the edge to Misa there, but still a really, really solid start there for Battaglia on a Kingston team that can really use a game breaker. So I'm happy to see Kingston potentially get that this season with Battaglia.
Absolutely. He's off to a great start on his end as well. And those two have been kind of standouts. I could have highlighted Porter Martone or Michael Misa or some of these draft eligibles, but I wanted to give some love to some outsiders on that side. We don't really hear much about Rehkopf and Battaglia when people are talking about OHL standouts, because we've got a couple of draft eligibles that are absolutely just tearing this league apart in Porter Martone and Michael Misa, but they deserve some love. They've been absolutely fantastic. And yeah, that's our second segment done. We'll get into our third segment. We're talking about Riley Heidt and Oskar Vuollet, the Canes' 5th rounder who just scored a hat trick in the SHL as an 18-year-old. We'll get into that in just a second. But just before, a quick word from our sponsors at FanDuel.
Hey NFL fans, you can start the season off big with a massive return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. Whether you want to take your big swings on American football with the NFL or European football with the Champions League, the choice is yours. Or maybe you prefer tennis or golf, or if you're listening to this podcast, maybe hockey is your sport of choice. Whatever interests you, whatever floats your boat, whatever kind of swings you feel like taking, FanDuel has something for everyone. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com.
Alrighty, so now our final segment, we'll be talking about Riley Heidt and Oskar Vuollet as our last two standouts here for the Rinkside Roundup, our weekly breakdown of this week's standout performers. We'll start off with Riley Heidt here, 64th overall pick in the 2023 NHL draft of the Minnesota Wild, 5'11", 185 pounds, and he played really, really well in preseason. And yeah, Bill Guerin chimed in on Heidt's game and really liked him and kind of lauded his skills, but he ended up not surviving the last round of cuts there for Minnesota and was sent down to the Prince George Cougars. And he basically looked around that city and went, this city's mine, and started dominating for the Prince George Cougars. 6 points in 3 games so far. He had a 3-point game in his first game back on October 2nd, 2 assists in his second game back on October 4th, and then scored an assist as well in their most recent game on Saturday. So 3 games, 1 goal, 4 assists, 1 goal, 5 assists for 6 points. Great performance for him since coming back. And you really see the dominance from this player at this level. I think, if he could, he'd be playing the AHL and playing pretty well. He was very, very close to NHL ready. We've both been very big fans of Riley Heidt. I think myself especially. I've been a bit higher on him over the years than you have. But talk me through your read on Heidt, what his progression's been like over the past couple of years, and what you like the most about his game.
Yeah, I mean, he's a really dynamic on puck player. It really boils down to that. He makes his best plays. He's at his best with the puck on his stick. And at 5'11", 183 pounds as a center/left wing, I think that his frame's gotten to the point now where he could take that leap to play AHL hockey pretty soon at the end of the season. And I'm looking forward to seeing how he fares in that environment. But for the time being, he's going to just be a dominant guy in the WHL for Prince George. He's a fantastic puck handler. Really, really dangerous playmaker on the power play, especially. I don't think there's a more dangerous playmaker with the man advantage in the WHL today than Riley Heidt. And he's also really elevated his game at 5-on-5 and accessing the middle with a bit more pace and determination, which I've liked to see as well. But as you mentioned, you were definitely a really big fan of him in his draft year. I think I had him ranked maybe like 3 or 4 spots lower than you did that season, but you very much liked that 2023 WHL class, right? Whether it be Riley Heidt or Luca Cagnoni, there's a lot of guys that you were banging the table for. And I mean, we both really loved Zach Benson too.
Yeah, Zach Benson is your clear and obvious one there. But yeah, Heidt and Cagnoni were the 2 guys I was banging the table for, and was very surprised to see outside the top 50. Let alone in Cagnoni's case in the 120s. That was absolutely ridiculous. But overall, Riley Heidt's been very impressive over the last couple of years. He's incredibly nasty and violent as a player. Him and Cone Zemer were the 2 most annoying players in the WHL last season. They both played on the same line, on the same team, and were an absolute nightmare for any opponent that they came up against. Post whistle cross checks and scrums and just little nasty stuff that makes you think these guys are going to be very, very annoying to play against in the NHL. Riley Heidt especially. I mean, he's always in opponents' faces, and Bill Guerin said it best. He has a bit of FU in his game. He's got that in-your-face style that I love from players. On top of the skill, I mean, he's not just a pest. He's not just an annoying player. He's an incredibly, incredibly skillful player. Playmaking stands out especially, but he's got a decent shot as well. He scored 117 points in 66 games last year for the Prince George Cougars, including 80 assists. That's right, 80 assists last season. So definitely a playmaker, but he uses it incredibly well. I think he's ready for the jump, but so far he's in the WHL and is probably going to dominate that team again. Moving on to our final player here in our Rinkside Roundup, a prospect that we had to note because he is 18 years old, was drafted in the 5th round by who else but the Carolina Hurricanes, and has scored a hat trick this week in the SHL against men. Talk me through Oskar Vuollet. He's not a player we really gave a lot of attention to last year. I don't think he featured on either one of our boards, but so far, great point totals in the SHL, right?
Yeah, and maybe he should have featured on one of our boards, considering that he was the top the top per game scorer in the entire J20 last season, which I mean is certainly a sign of offensive upside. He scored in 41 games last season, 29 goals and 61 points. Very much relying on a separating ability of reading the game at that level, and the big question mark with him has always been the physicality. He's not in terms of a frame necessarily. He's 5'11", 181 pounds, but the physical involvement, the physical engagement, the leverage mechanics have all been really, really like question marks in his game, and I think definitely led to a lot of us public scouts kind of just like ignoring him in terms of the rankings because it just wasn't the most projectable style of play in the world. But I mean, as you mentioned, as a 13th forward in just 7 games, he has 4 goals and 5 points so far. And I definitely think he'll be getting more minutes as the year goes on if he's able to continue playing the style of game. He's shown that he's able to read the game at least an SHL level so far this season. He's really been making a difference. He's been finding gaps in coverage and really been manipulating defenses very nicely off puck so far from what I've seen as well. So a lot to like with him. I think that the offensive tools are perhaps not like massively dynamic or game changing. And again, in terms of projection, we're not going to start saying that he's a top 6 projection at this point, but I definitely think that his chances of becoming a bottom 6 NHLer look a little bit brighter today than they did even just 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Can the Canes just stop? Can they just stop doing this every single draft? It's getting annoying. Like every single draft, they find these prospects who end up just popping off massively after their draft year, or guys that the public sphere really, really likes. They'll go and review them, and they'll be like, yeah, this is a great player, let's pick him. And then they pick him and they become great. I'm thinking of Bradley Nadeau and Scott Morrow, and even Fyodor Avramov so far. The torrid start in the MHL and then got promoted right away to the KHL, and he's getting the KHL treatment, the 3 minutes of ice time a game, and you didn't do anything? Well, you're benched next game. That treatment, but still, they draft a lot out of Russia. They know how to pick their players there. Alexander Nikishin is a fantastic example of that as well. They're just a fantastic drafting team, and Oskar Vuollet is just another example of that. They've drafted out of Sweden as well. They like their Swedish prospects, but Sweden and Russia are kind of their 2 main regions, and so far they're exploiting, I'd say, a weakness in the market with those two markets. Really, I mean, they know what they're doing. I love the Canes scouting team. They know exactly how to sift through the mess that is public scouting and find the gems there, and I respect them a lot for that. But that's our episode done. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you thought of the episode and what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review, and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our future shows as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of October. This has been Hage with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.